The voice that argues back is not your enemy, it is the most honest friend you have ever had. While your ego constructs elaborate stories about who you are and what you want, this other voice cuts through the fiction and tells you the truth you do not want to hear. It is the part of you that says, "No, this is not right," when everyone else applauds your choices. It is the doubt that rises when you are about to betray yourself, the resistance that appears when you are living a lie. Most people treat this inner opposition as a problem to be solved, a weakness to be overcome, a neurosis to be medicated away. But what if this arguing voice is actually the unconscious trying to balance your one-sidedness? What if it is the voice of the self, your greater totality, refusing to let you become a caricature, a persona, a mask with nothing behind it? The tragedy of modern life is that we have been taught to silence this voice, to be consistent, to stay positive, to eliminate inner conflict. But I understood something radical in my years of exploring the psyche. You do not become whole by eliminating conflict. You become whole by bringing the conflict into consciousness and learning to hold the tension between opposites. Before we continue this exploration into the depths of the psyche, I would ask a small favor of those who find value in these conversations. If this work resonates with you, consider subscribing to this channel so that we may continue this dialogue together. And I am genuinely curious, leave a comment telling me what city and what time you are watching from. There is something profound about knowing that these ideas, born over a century ago in my study in Zurich, are now reaching minds across the world in this moment. Now, let us turn our attention fully to the question at hand. You see, what I want to share with you today is not a theory I read in a textbook or borrowed from someone else's philosophy. This comes from the deepest laboratory I have ever known, my own psyche, and from decades of sitting with patients who came to me confused, fragmented, exhausted from the war raging inside their own minds. They would tell me, "Dr. Jung, I don't understand myself. I decide to do one thing, and then I sabotage it. I commit to a path, and something in me pulls me in the opposite direction. I know what I should want, but I can't make myself want it." And I would tell them what I am telling you now. You are not broken. You are simply unconscious of the vast community that lives within you. What you will learn in our time together is this. You will understand that the inner conflict you experience is not a sign of psychological weakness, but evidence of the psyche's natural complexity and its drive toward wholeness. You will learn a method, active imagination, that allows you to engage these inner voices directly, to dialogue with them, to hear their concerns, and integrate their wisdom, rather than spending your life exhausted by trying to silence them. You will discover that what you have been calling self-sabotage is often the unconscious, compensating for your ego's one-sidedness, trying desperately to restore balance before you destroy yourself with your own narrow vision. And perhaps most importantly, you will be liberated from the tyrannical demand of modern culture that you be one unified, consistent self at all times. This demand is not just unrealistic, it is psychologically violent. It splits you against yourself and then condemns you for being split. I speak to you not as someone who has merely studied these things from a distance, but as someone who has lived them. After my break with Freud in 1913, I entered what others might have called a breakdown, but what I came to understand as a breakthrough into the unconscious. I heard voices. I saw figures. And I had a choice. I could pathologize this experience, call myself mad, and shut it all down. Or I could turn toward it with courage and curiosity. I chose the latter. And what I discovered changed everything I understood about the human psyche. You have been told that mental health means having a clear, singular sense of who you are and what you want, with no contradictions, no doubts, no inner arguments. But this is a fantasy. It is an ideal that exists nowhere in nature. The psyche is not a monarchy with one ruler. It is more like an ancient city-state, with many factions, each with its own interests, its own wisdom, its own shadow. Your conscious ego, what you think of as I, is just one voice in this assembly. Often, it is not even the wisest voice. The arguing voice, the one that contradicts you, that resists your plans, that refuses to go along with the story you are telling yourself. That voice often carries truths your ego is too frightened or too proud to acknowledge. Think about this for a moment. When you are about to say yes to something that is wrong for you, what happens? Something in you tightens. A voice whispers, "This is not right." You feel resistance, hesitation, doubt. The modern world tells you to ignore this, to push through, to be decisive, to commit. But what if that resistance is not weakness? What if it is wisdom? What if it is the unconscious trying to protect you from a path that will lead you away from yourself? Or, consider the opposite. You are filled with ambition, rushing toward a goal, absolutely certain of your direction. And then, inexplicably, you find yourself procrastinating, making mistakes, undermining your own success. You call this self-sabotage. You beat yourself up for lacking discipline. But what if there is another way to see this? What if some part of you, some autonomous complex in the unconscious, knows something your ego does not? What if it sees that this goal you are chasing is not actually yours, but something you adopted from your parents, from society, from a persona you constructed to win approval? What if it is arguing back to save your life? This is not abstract philosophy I am sharing with you. This is the lived reality of the psyche. And the cost of remaining unconscious of it is devastating. When you refuse to engage the arguing voice, it does not simply disappear. It goes underground. It becomes a complex, a feeling-toned cluster of energy with its own autonomous existence in the unconscious. And from there, it begins to orchestrate your life in ways you cannot see. It influences your moods, your choices, your relationships. You think you are acting freely, but you are actually being moved by forces you have refused to acknowledge. This is what I mean when I say that people do not have complexes. Complexes have people. Let me tell you a story that illustrates this with painful clarity. Many years ago, a man came to see me. He was a lawyer, quite successful by external standards, respected in his field, financially secure, admired by colleagues. But he was miserable. And more than that, he was baffled. Because every time he reached the peak of an achievement, every time success was within his grasp, he would do something inexplicable to destroy it. He would alienate a crucial client. He would make a reckless decision. He would sabotage himself in ways that seemed almost intentional. And yet, he swore he had no idea why he was doing it. We worked together for some time, exploring his history, his relationships, his dreams. And then one day, I suggested we try something different. I asked him to close his eyes, to turn his attention inward, and to speak directly to this part of himself, the part that was undermining him. At first, he resisted. "There is no other part," he said. "It is just me. I am just weak, undisciplined." "Imagine," I said, "that this self-sabotage has a voice, a face, an intelligence of its own. And ask it, who are you? What do you want from me?" For a long time, he sat in silence. I could see the tension in his body, the resistance, and then something shifted. His face softened, tears came to his eyes, and he began to speak, but not in his usual voice. This was quieter, younger. He said, "I am the part of you that remembers being a boy. I remember your father standing over you, demanding perfection, telling you that your worth depended on achievement. I remember how terrified you were. And I am still terrified. Because if you succeed, If you become everything he wanted you to be, then he wins. Then, you will have lost yourself completely. So I stop you. I sabotage you. Not because I want to hurt you, but because I am trying to save you. When he opened his eyes, he was shaking. For 30 years, this inner voice had been arguing back, trying to protect him from a life that was not his own. And for 30 years, he had been at war with it. Never once stopping to ask what it wanted, what it knew, what it was trying to tell him. You see, we are not haunted by our past. We are inhabited by it. And the only way forward is to turn around and meet what has been following us all along. This is the crucial point I need you to understand. These inner voices, these arguing parts, are not random. They are not irrational. They have a logic, a purpose, a history. They formed in moments when your conscious ego could not handle what was happening, when the experience was too painful, too complex, too threatening to integrate. So the psyche did something ingenious. It split off that experience, gave it its own container, its own autonomous existence, and there it lives, in the unconscious, carrying the memory, the feeling, the unfinished business. And it will continue to argue back, to resist, to disrupt your conscious plans, until you finally turn around and listen. This is not pathology. This is the psyche's attempt at self-regulation, at wholeness. But it can only complete its work if you become conscious. If you remain identified solely with your ego, with your conscious intentions, then you are living a half-life. You are a king who believes he rules alone, not realizing that half his kingdom is in rebellion, not out of malice, but because he has refused to hear their legitimate grievances. Let me share with you something from my own experience, because I do not speak to you as someone who has merely observed this from the outside. In 1913, after my painful separation from Freud, I entered a period of profound disorientation. I began to experience what I can only describe as an invasion from the unconscious. I would hear voices speaking to me. I would see figures, vivid and autonomous, appearing in my inner vision. At first, I was terrified. Was I going mad? Was this schizophrenia? I had all the clinical knowledge to diagnose myself with a disorder, but something in me, some deeper instinct said, "No, do not pathologize this. Turn toward it. See what it wants." And so I did. I developed a method I later called active imagination. I would sit quietly, turn my attention inward, and allow these figures to emerge. And I would speak with them, not as fantasies I was creating, but as autonomous beings with their own reality. One of these figures became particularly significant. I called him Philemon. He appeared to me as an old man, with the wings of a kingfisher and the horns of a bull, and he would speak to me, teach me, challenge me. There were times when Philemon would say things that contradicted my conscious understanding, things I did not want to hear. He would argue with my philosophical positions. He would question my assumptions. And I realized something humbling and profound. This figure knew things I did not know. He had access to wisdom that my conscious mind could not reach. This was the moment I understood viscerally, not just intellectually, that the unconscious is not merely a repository of repressed material, as Freud believed. It is a living, intelligent, purposeful reality. It is not just primitive or infantile. It contains the wisdom of the ages, the accumulated experience of humanity, what I came to call the collective unconscious. And it speaks through these autonomous figures, these inner voices, these parts of us that argue back. But here is what almost no one understands about these inner voices. They are not trying to destroy you. They are trying to balance you. The psyche has a self-regulating function. When you become too one-sided in your conscious attitude, the unconscious compensates. If you are too rational, It sends you irrational impulses and dreams. If you are too inflated, it humbles you. If you are too identified with your persona, your public mask, it activates the shadow, the parts of yourself you have rejected. This is not punishment. This is correction. This is the psyche trying to make you whole. Think of it this way. Imagine you are walking through life leaning heavily to one side. Perhaps you are leaning into ambition, productivity, achievement. You have convinced yourself, this is who you are. This is what matters. But something in you knows this is not the whole truth. There is another side, the side that wants rest, connection, meaning beyond accomplishment. And so the unconscious begins to argue back. It sends you fatigue. It makes you accidentally miss important meetings. It fills you with inexplicable sadness in moments of triumph. You call this depression. You call this burnout. But what if it is actually compensation? What if it is the psyche saying, you are too far to one side. Come back to center. Remember the rest of yourself. Or perhaps you lean the other way. Perhaps you have become too passive, too withdrawn, too hidden. You tell yourself you are introverted, sensitive, not built for the world's demands. But something in you knows this is not the whole truth either. There is a part of you that wants to be seen, to create, to impact the world. And so the unconscious sends you restlessness. It fills you with fantasies of heroic action. It makes you irritable with your own smallness. Again, you might call this anxiety. But what if it is compensation? What if it is the psyche saying, you are too far to one side. Come back to center. Claim the rest of yourself. This is the compensation principle. And it is absolutely fundamental to understanding the arguing voice. The unconscious does not simply agree with whatever your ego wants. It has its own perspective, and that perspective is oriented toward wholeness, toward the self. The self is the totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, all of it. And the self will not let you live a half-life. It will send you symptoms, dreams, slips, disruptions, anything to get your attention and pull you back toward wholeness. Now I must address something that causes great confusion. When I speak of inner multiplicity, of autonomous voices and figures in the psyche, people sometimes worry. Am I talking about dissociative identity disorder? Am I saying that mental health means being fragmented into separate personalities? Absolutely not. There is a crucial difference between pathological dissociation and the natural multiplicity of the psyche. In dissociation, the ego loses the capacity to hold these various parts together in consciousness. There is no dialogue, no integration, only switching from one state to another, with amnesia in between. But what I am describing is something entirely different. I am describing a conscious ego that is strong enough to recognize these inner voices, to engage them, to hold the tension between them without being overwhelmed. Psychological health is not about being unified in the sense of being simple, singular, without contradiction. It is about being integrated. Integration means that you know these parts exist. You give them space to speak. You understand their concerns. And you make conscious choices that take them into account. It means you are not identified with any one voice, including your ego. You become instead the space in which these voices can speak, the consciousness that can hold them all. This is vastly different from the rigid unity that modern culture demands of you. You are told to be yourself, as if the self were some fixed, unchanging thing you could pin down and perform consistently. You are told to know what you want, as if desire were simple and singular. You are told to eliminate negative thoughts, as if the psyche were a garden you could weed into perfect positivity. But this is violence against the psyche. It forces you to repress huge portions of yourself, to exile them into the shadow where they become toxic and autonomous. True health lies in the opposite direction, not in eliminating the multiplicity, but in becoming conscious of it. Let me give you a concrete example from my own life. As a young psychiatrist, I developed a certain professional persona. I was the doctor, the authority, the one with answers. This persona was necessary to some degree. My patients needed to trust me, to feel they were in capable hands. But over time, I became too identified with this role. I began to believe my own mask. I thought I had to always be wise, always be certain, always have the answer. And then something happened. I began to have dreams that humbled me, that showed me as foolish, lost, incompetent. And in my waking life, I began to feel a resistance to my own certainty. A voice in me would argue, "But you do not really know this. You are guessing. You are playing a role." At first, I was disturbed by this. Was I losing confidence? Was I becoming insecure? But then I realized what was happening. My shadow was arguing back. The part of me that I had rejected, the uncertain, the humble, the not knowing, was demanding to be heard. And it was right to do so, because my persona, my mask of certainty, was making me rigid, making me less able to truly see my patients, less able to learn and grow. So I began to engage this voice. I would sit with it and ask, "What do you want me to know?" And it would tell me, "You are not as wise as you pretend. You are learning, just like everyone else. Your patients do not need your certainty. They need your genuine presence, your willingness to not know, to explore together." And when I integrated this, when I allowed my professional persona to be balanced by this shadow of uncertainty and humility, I became a better therapist. Not because I eliminated the conflict, but because I held it consciously. This brings me to one of the most important practices I can share with you: active imagination. This is the method by which you can engage these inner voices directly, consciously, with intention. It is not the same as passive fantasy, where you simply let your mind wander and images come and go. In active imagination, you enter into relationship with the unconscious. You treat these inner figures as real, autonomous beings, worthy of respect and dialogue. Here is how it works. You find a quiet space where you will not be disturbed. You close your eyes and turn your attention inward. You do not force anything, but you also do not simply drift. You are alert, present, waiting, and you pose a question to the unconscious. Perhaps you ask, "Who in me is resisting this decision I am trying to make?" Or, "What does this anxiety want me to know?" Or simply, "Who wants to speak to me now?" And then, you wait in receptive silence. This is crucial. You are not making something up. You are listening. And if you are patient, if you are genuinely open, something will come. An image, a voice, a feeling, a sense of presence. When it comes, you do not analyze it immediately. You do not interpret it or try to control it. You engage it. You speak to it as you would to a person sitting across from you. You might ask, "Who are you? What do you want from me? What do you want me to understand?" And then, and this is the difficult part, you let it answer. You give it autonomy. You do not put words in its mouth. You allow it to surprise you, to say things you did not expect, even things you do not want to hear. I cannot emphasize enough how important this autonomy is. If you are simply talking to yourself, creating a fantasy that confirms what you already believe, You are not doing active imagination. The hallmark of genuine active imagination is that the figures say things you did not consciously intend, that they have their own perspective, their own agency. This can be unsettling. It requires humility. It requires you to accept that you do not know everything about yourself, that there are intelligences within you that operate independently of your conscious will. After the dialogue, you record it. You write it down in a journal, exactly as it happened. And over time, you will notice patterns. You will see that certain figures appear repeatedly. You will begin to understand their concerns, their wisdom, their role in your psychological economy. And you will find that as you engage them consciously, they stop disrupting your life unconsciously. The energy that was locked in conflict becomes available for integration, for growth, for the work of individuation. Now, what happens when you do this work? What is the result of turning toward the arguing voice instead of trying to silence it? This is where we arrive at what I call the transcendent function. The transcendent function is the psyche's capacity to generate a new position that transcends the conflict between opposites. Let me explain what I mean. When you are in conflict, when your ego wants one thing and another voice argues for the opposite, the normal response is to try to resolve it by choosing one side and suppressing the other. Your ego says, "I should take this job." The other voice says, "But it does not feel right." And you think you have to pick one. Either you take the job and ignore the doubt, or you listen to the doubt and give up the opportunity. But both of these options leave you split. Either way, you are exiling part of yourself. The transcendent function offers a third way. Instead of choosing sides, you hold the tension. You sit with the conflict without rushing to resolve it. You give both voices their full say. You feel the pull in both directions. And you do not collapse into one or the other. You hold. And if you can bear this tension long enough, something extraordinary happens. A third thing emerges. It is not a compromise, not a middle ground, not a watered-down version of both positions. It is genuinely new. It is a symbol, an insight, a direction that neither voice could have produced alone, but that contains the wisdom of both. This is the actual process of psychological transformation. This is how you grow. Not by eliminating conflict, but by holding it consciously until it transforms into something higher. And the arguing voice is essential to this process. Because without it, there is no tension to hold. Without it, you just have your ego running the show. And your ego alone is not wise enough to guide you toward wholeness. It is too narrow, too identified with one side of life. The arguing voice brings the other side, the compensatory side, the side you need to become whole. Let me give you a personal example. There was a period in my life when I was deeply engaged in my professional work writing, seeing patients, building my theories. I was convinced this was my purpose, my calling, but I began to have dreams of nature, of lakes and forests, of stone and earth. And I began to feel a pull to do something I had never imagined, to work with my hands, to build something physical. At first, I dismissed this. I am a psychiatrist, a scholar, not a laborer. This makes no sense. But the pull did not go away. It argued back against my professional identity. And finally, I listened. I began to work with stone. I built a tower at Bollingen, by the lake, with my own hands. And I discovered something profound. This work was not separate from my psychological work, it was an essential part of it. It grounded me. It connected me to something timeless and elemental. It balanced the abstract, intellectual nature of my profession with something concrete and embodied. The part of me that wanted to build was not undermining the part that wanted to write and think it was completing it. If I had silenced that arguing voice, if I had stayed purely in the intellectual realm, I would have become one-sided, brittle, cut off from the earth. But by holding the tension, by honoring both my scholarly work and this strange pull toward stone, I became more whole. This is the transcendent function in action. Now, I want to address something that may be troubling you as you listen to all of this. You may be thinking, but how do I know which voice to trust? If there are multiple voices, multiple perspectives, how do I decide what to do? This is an excellent question, and it points to a common misunderstanding. The goal is not to simply obey whichever voice is loudest or most insistent. The goal is to become conscious of all the voices and then make a choice from a place of integration. From the self, not from any single part. Think of it this way. Imagine you are leading a council. Various members of the council have different concerns, different perspectives. One is focused on safety, another on growth, another on pleasure, another on duty. As the leader, your job is not to silence some members and only listen to others. Your job is to hear them all, to understand what each is trying to protect or achieve, and then to make a decision that takes all of these concerns into account, even if it does not fully satisfy any one voice. This is mature psychological functioning. This is the ego in right relationship with the unconscious. The arguing voice is one member of this council. It has valid concerns, but it is not the only voice. And you, the conscious you, the observing you, are not identical with any single voice. You are the space in which the council convenes. You are the awareness that can hold them all. And from this place, you can make choices that honor the complexity of who you are. But this requires practice. It requires a shift in how you relate to yourself. You must stop trying to be a unified, consistent self and start recognizing yourself as a community. And you must develop the capacity to hold tension, to sit with conflict without immediately resolving it, to trust that if you can bear the discomfort long enough, a deeper wisdom will emerge. Let me give you some specific practices you can begin today. First, the daily inner dialogue. Set aside 5 minutes each day, perhaps in the morning or before bed. Sit in a quiet space, close your eyes, and simply turn your attention inward. Ask yourself, who in me disagrees with the choice I am about to make? Or, what voice have I been ignoring today? And then wait. Do not force an answer. Just be present, receptive, and if a voice comes, if an image or feeling emerges, engage it. Ask it what it wants you to know. And then, and this is crucial, record the dialogue in a journal. Write it down as if it were a conversation between two people. Over time, you will build a record of this inner community, and you will begin to see patterns, themes, recurring figures. Second, practice personifying the arguing voice. When you notice inner resistance or conflict, do not just think about the content of the argument. Ask yourself, if this were a person, who would they be? What age are they? What do they look like? What is their concern? This is not fiction. This is recognition. You are not making up a character. You are recognizing an autonomous complex that already exists and giving it a form so you can engage it more directly. You may find, as my patient did, that the arguing voice has the face of a child, or a critical parent, or a wise old figure. Each one brings its own message. Third, do a shadow inventory. Take a piece of paper and write down the qualities you most judge or despise in other people. Be honest. Do not censor yourself. Perhaps you despise arrogance, or weakness, or dishonesty, or passivity. Whatever comes up, write it down, and then ask yourself, where in me do these qualities live? Because I can tell you with certainty. If a quality provokes strong emotion in you, when you see it in others, it is because it exists in your own shadow, in the parts of yourself you have rejected and refused to see. This does not mean you act on these qualities, but they are there, in potential, in the unconscious, and they are arguing back, trying to be integrated. Welcome them, not to act them out, but to acknowledge them, to understand what need or energy they represent, and to find a conscious way to honor that energy. Fourth, practice holding tension. When you are facing a decision and you feel strong inner opposition, resist the urge to resolve it quickly. Do not force a decision. Instead, sit with both positions. Write from the perspective of each voice. Let the voice that says yes have its full say. Let the voice that says no have its full say. And then sit in the middle and wait. You are not waiting passively, you are holding the tension actively, consciously. You are trusting that if you can bear the discomfort of not knowing, a third thing will emerge. It might be a dream, a sudden insight, a symbolic image, or a new course of action you had not considered. This is the transcendent function at work. This is how the psyche creates new possibilities. These practices are not tricks. They are not techniques for manipulating yourself into feeling better or getting what you want. They are the actual work of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are by integrating what you have been unconscious of. This work is slow. It is difficult. It requires courage, because you will meet parts of yourself you have been avoiding, sometimes for your entire life. But it is also the most rewarding work you will ever do, because it leads to genuine wholeness, to a life lived from the self rather than from the ego's narrow agenda. I want to be very clear about something. When you engage these inner voices, you are not doing this to eliminate them, to fix yourself, to become a more efficient or successful person. You are doing this to become more real. You are doing this because a life lived entirely from the ego, without awareness of the unconscious, is a life half-lived. It is a life of persona, of mask, of performance. It may look good from the outside, but it is hollow. It lacks soul. And the arguing voice is the soul's refusal to let you settle for that hollowness. Think about the people you know who seem most alive, most authentic, most whole. I guarantee you, they are not people who have eliminated inner conflict. They are people who have learned to hold it consciously. They are people who have integrated their shadow, who have made peace with their contradictions, who can be both strong and vulnerable, both certain and doubtful, both ambitious and content. They are not one thing. They are many things. And they have learned to let all of those things coexist without tearing themselves apart. This is what I am inviting you into. Not a life without conflict, but a life where conflict becomes creative rather than destructive. A life where the arguing voice is welcomed as a partner in your becoming, rather than feared as an enemy to be conquered. A life where you are not a single note trying to drown out all the others, but a symphony, a complex harmony of many voices working together. Now, let us go even deeper. I want to talk about the moral dimension of this work, because it is not just psychological, it is ethical. When you silence the arguing voice, when you exile parts of yourself into the unconscious, you are not just harming yourself. You are also making yourself dangerous to others. Because the parts you refuse to acknowledge do not disappear. They go into the shadow, where they become dark, primitive, and autonomous. And from there, they leak out in unconscious ways. They come out as projection, as passive aggression, as sudden eruptions of rage or cruelty that you yourself do not understand. How many times have you seen someone who presents as perfectly kind, perfectly controlled, perfectly good, and then, suddenly, they do something shocking? They betray a friend. They explode in anger. They reveal a cruelty no one saw coming. This is the shadow erupting. This is what happens when you repress parts of yourself for so long that they become toxic and autonomous. They strike out from the unconscious, and you are as surprised as anyone, because you were not conscious of them. But when you do the work I am describing, when you turn toward the arguing voice and the shadow it often represents, you bring these energies into consciousness. And in consciousness, they can be transformed. They can be understood. You can ask, what is this anger really about? What is this cruelty protecting? And you can find ways to honor the legitimate need or energy beneath the destructive expression. This is how you become not just psychologically healthier, but ethically more mature. Because you are no longer unconsciously inflicting your shadow on the people around you. There is a concept I want to introduce here that is central to this work: the persona. The persona is the mask you wear for the world, the role you play in society. It is necessary to some degree. We all need a public face, a way of navigating social expectations. But the danger comes when you become identified with the persona, when you believe that the mask is who you really are. When this happens, everything that does not fit the persona gets pushed into the shadow. If your persona is the successful professional, then any failure, any vulnerability, any weakness gets exiled. If your persona is the nice person, then any anger, any selfishness, any cruelty gets exiled. And these exiled parts form complexes, autonomous voices that argue back from the unconscious. The work of individuation requires that you disidentify from the persona. You must recognize that the persona is a tool, not your identity. You are not your job title. You are not your social role. You are not the image you maintain for others. You are something far more complex, far more interesting, and yes, far more contradictory. And the arguing voice is often the first signal that you have become too identified with the persona. It is the rest of yourself demanding to be acknowledged. I have seen this countless times in my practice. The person who has built their entire identity around being strong comes to me because they are collapsing under the weight of their own suppressed vulnerability. The person who has built their identity around being good comes to me because they are haunted by fantasies of violence or revenge. The person who has built their identity around being rational comes to me because they are being flooded by irrational emotions they cannot control. In each case, the persona has become too rigid, and the shadow is erupting. And the work is always the same. Turn toward what you have been avoiding. Engage it, listen to it, and integrate it. Now, I must address something that often troubles people when they first encounter these ideas. You may be thinking, but if I acknowledge my anger, my selfishness, my darkness, will I not become those things? Will I not act them out? This is a fear rooted in a misunderstanding. Acknowledging something in consciousness is not the same as acting it out. In fact, it is the opposite. When you are unconscious of your anger, it leaks out in 1,000 small cruelties. In passive-aggressive comments, in cold withdrawals, in sudden explosions. But when you become conscious of your anger, when you can say, yes, I am angry, and this is why, then you have a choice. You can express it directly and honestly, or you can understand what need it represents and address that need in a constructive way. Consciousness gives you choice. Unconsciousness leaves you at the mercy of forces you do not understand. This is why I say the shadow is not evil. It is simply unconscious. It contains everything you have rejected about yourself. And yes, some of that is genuinely dark and destructive, but much of it is simply energy, vitality, Qualities that were condemned not because they were wrong, but because they did not fit the image you or your family or your culture demanded. Your anger might actually be healthy self-assertion. Your selfishness might actually be necessary self-care. Your darkness might actually be depth, the capacity to face difficult truths. You will not know until you turn toward it and ask. And here is something that will surprise you. Sometimes the shadow is more moral than the ego. I have seen cases where the arguing voice is actually the voice of conscience, and the ego is the one engaging in ethical compromise. The ego wants to do something that will bring social approval or financial gain, and the shadow argues back, saying, "But this is wrong. This betrays your values." In such cases, the so-called negative voice is actually the one aligned with your deeper truth, and the positive, socially acceptable ego is the one leading you astray. This is why you cannot approach this work with a simplistic morality. You cannot say, the ego is good, the shadow is bad, and I must strengthen the good and eliminate the bad. The psyche is far more complex than that. Sometimes the ego is inflated and needs to be humbled. Sometimes the shadow contains the very qualities you need to grow. The only way to navigate this complexity is to sue. Bring it all into consciousness and develop a relationship with it. A dialogue. Let me tell you about another patient. A woman who came to me in great distress. She was a devoted mother, someone who had sacrificed everything for her children. Her entire identity was built around being selfless, nurturing, always available. But she was exhausted, resentful, and she did not understand why. In her dreams, a fierce, angry woman kept appearing. Someone who wanted to destroy everything, to burn down the house, to abandon the children. She was terrified of this figure. She thought it meant she was a bad mother, that she secretly hated her children. But when we worked with this figure through active imagination, when she actually dialogued with this angry woman, something different emerged. The figure said, "I am the part of you that wants a life. I am the part of you that has desires, ambitions, needs of your own. You have silenced me completely in your devotion to others, and I am dying. And yes, I am angry. I want to burn it all down because that is how desperate I am to be acknowledged." This was not a demon. This was her own vitality, her own selfhood, screaming to be recognized. And the transformation came when she found a way to honor both voices, the devoted mother and the woman with her own life. She did not abandon her children. She did not burn down her life, but she did make space for herself. She began to pursue interests that had nothing to do with her role as mother. She set boundaries. She allowed herself to want things, and the angry figure in her dreams transformed. It became a wise woman, a guide, no longer destructive but protective, ensuring that she did not lose herself again. This is the alchemy of engaging the arguing voice. It transforms. When you meet it with consciousness, with respect, with genuine curiosity, it changes. The hostile critic becomes the discerning guardian. The saboteur becomes the protector. The angry destroyer becomes the fierce advocate for your authentic life. But this transformation can only happen in consciousness, in dialogue. As long as these figures remain in the unconscious, they stay primitive, destructive, frozen in the form they took when they were first exiled. Now, let us talk about what happens when you do not do this work. What are the consequences of living your entire life unconscious of these inner voices, trying to silence them, refusing to engage? The first consequence is psychological stagnation. You stop growing. You become rigid, brittle, one-dimensional. Because growth requires the integration of opposites, and you cannot integrate what you refuse to acknowledge. You get stuck in your persona, your habitual patterns, your narrow sense of who you are. Life loses its vitality, its depth, its meaning. The second consequence is projection. When you cannot see something in yourself, you see it everywhere outside yourself. You project your shadow onto others. You become judgmental, critical, convinced that everyone else is angry, selfish, cruel, weak, whatever qualities you have exiled from your own consciousness. This destroys relationships. It makes genuine connection impossible because you are not actually seeing other people. You are seeing your own unconscious contents reflected back to you. The third consequence is what I call possession by the complex. When you refuse to engage the autonomous voices in the unconscious, they do not go away. They become stronger, more autonomous, more capable of taking over your entire personality in certain moments. Have you ever experienced yourself doing or saying something completely unlike your usual self? Something you later look back on with confusion or shame? This is what I mean by possession. A complex has taken over. An unconscious part has seized control because it was never given a conscious outlet. The fourth consequence is physical illness. The psyche and the body are not separate. When psychological, unexplained content cannot be processed consciously, it often manifests somatically. You get headaches, stomach problems, chronic pain, fatigue. The body carries what the mind refuses to acknowledge. This is not superstition. This is the lived reality of the psyche-soma unity. I have seen countless patients whose physical symptoms resolved when they finally addressed the psychological conflicts they had been avoiding. And the fifth consequence, perhaps the most tragic, is the failure to individuate. Individuation is the process of becoming who you truly are, of realizing your unique potential, of living from the self rather than from the ego or the persona. But you cannot individuate if you remain unconscious. You cannot become whole if you are constantly at war with half of yourself. You will live and die having never truly met yourself, having never become who you were meant to be. This is the real tragedy. But there is another way. And that is what I am offering you here. The path of turning toward the arguing voice, of engaging the shadow, of bringing the unconscious into consciousness through active imagination and inner dialogue. This is the path of individuation. This is the path toward wholeness. And it begins with a simple shift in attitude. Instead of seeing the voice that argues back as your enemy, you begin to see it as your guide. Instead of trying to silence it, you ask it what it knows. Instead of fighting it, you learn from it. This work is not easy. It requires courage, because you will meet parts of yourself you have avoided for good reason. It requires humility, because you will discover that you are not who you thought you were, that your ego's understanding is partial and limited. It requires patience, because the unconscious does not work on your timetable. It speaks in symbols, in dreams, in indirect ways that require contemplation and interpretation, but it is the most meaningful work you will ever do. And here is what you will discover if you commit to this path. You will discover that the arguing voice was right. It was protecting something valuable. It was compensating for your one-sidedness. It was trying to lead you toward a more complete, more authentic life. You will discover that the tension between your ego and this other voice is not a problem to be solved, but the very engine of your psychological growth. You will discover that you are not a simple, unified self, but a rich, complex, multifaceted being with depths you have only begun to explore. You will also discover something about the nature of consciousness itself. Consciousness is not a static thing. It is not something you achieve once and then possess forever. It is a process, an ongoing dialogue between the conscious and the unconscious. Every time you bring something from the unconscious into awareness, the unconscious generates new material. There is always more to discover, more to integrate, more to become. This is not a problem. This is the beauty of it. You are not a finished product. You are a living process, always becoming, always unfolding. And in this process, the arguing voice becomes your most trusted companion. It becomes the signal that you are moving too far in one direction, that you are becoming too identified with a single position, that you need to pause and reconsider. It becomes the voice of your own wholeness, calling you back to yourself again and again. Let me leave you with one final story. A story from mythology that captures this dynamic beautifully. In the ancient traditions, there are many images of the divine as multiple, as containing opposites. In alchemy, there is the image of the hermaphrodite, the being that is both male and female, combining what are usually seen as opposites. In Hinduism, there are deities with multiple arms, multiple faces, representing the many aspects of the divine. These are not primitive or confused images. They are profoundly wise. They recognize that ultimacy, wholeness, the divine, is not simple. It is complex. It holds everything. And you, in your own small way, are made in this image. You are not meant to be simple. You are meant to be whole. And whole means containing multitudes. It means honoring the voice that argues back, because that voice is part of the symphony of your being. So I invite you, I challenge you, to begin this work. Today, right now, turn inward. Ask, who in me wants to speak? What voice have I been ignoring? And then, listen, truly listen. Not to fix it, not to make it go away, but to hear it, to understand it, to give it the respect and attention it deserves. And watch as your inner warfare begins to transform into inner wisdom. Your wholeness does not lie in eliminating your contradictions. It lies in having the courage to hold them, to give each voice its due, and to let the tension between them forge you into something more real, more alive, more truly yourself than Fievel you ever imagined possible. The arguing voice is not your enemy. It is the call of your own soul, demanding that you become conscious, demanding that you become whole. Answer that call. Turn toward it, and let the great work of individuation begin. If this exploration has touched something in you, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel so we may continue these conversations together. Leave a like if this work has value for you. And please, share in the comments your own experience of these inner voices. What do they say to you? What have you discovered when you have stopped to listen? I am genuinely interested in your psychological journey. Until we meet again, may you have the courage to turn inward and meet yourself fully.